Hi there, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, how important are volunteers in conservation? And what are the different types of work that a volunteer can do and how can it benefit you and your career? Now, we answered these and many more questions in discussion with today's guest, Rhoda Ludford. Now, Rhoda is the Volunteer Development Consultant for the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, or the RSPB for short, which is Europe's largest wildlife conservation organisation with over 2,000 staff, 10,000 volunteers and 1 million members. Now, Rhoda has worked for the RSPB for over 22 years, mostly in volunteering development, and has recently moved into species recovery, where she's responsible for a project that develops and manages volunteer teams, doing mostly species recovery work across the UK. Now, in today's chat, she shares her experiences of working for the RSPB, her career path, and also her advice about how to connect with and make the most of their multiple volunteer opportunities. It's wide-ranging, it's a volunteer actioning and a species conserving chat. Enjoy.
Yeah, my name is Rhoda Ludford and I'm the project manager for the Species Volunteer Network at the RSPB.
Great. Well, thank you for joining the podcast and the chat today. It's really nice to be getting to know you a little bit, Rhoda, and to hear more about your work and specifically volunteering, which is such a kind of key theme of work within conservation, something a lot of people do at different stages in their career. So we're here to kind of talk more about that, what types of people volunteer, how they benefit from volunteering, and any tips or hints or advice you might have for people kind of looking to do more of it or to follow in your footsteps. And perhaps before we kind of do a deep dive into that area, which I know is going to be of interest, can you just give us a bit of a kind of a summary as to who the RSPB is, your employer? I know you've worked there for 20 some years. They're a huge organisation. They're very well known in the UK. But for people who haven't heard of the RSPB, who or what are you? Is it?
So the RSPB is the largest conservation charity in Europe, and we are working with birds and or nature species conservation throughout the UK and globally, working with our BTO partners as well.
Yeah. A good summary. So you've got 1 million plus members. I remember that figure from when I used to work for BirdLife International, which is almost like the international partnership form of the RSPB in the UK, and just a huge organisation doing lots of good for wildlife and birds here in the UK. So yeah, and globally, of course. Yeah. Great. And your job, so you are the volunteer development consultant, is what I kind of picked out from LinkedIn from you. And when we saw you in CC Pros, one of our members as well. Let's talk about volunteering then a bit more specifically. So let's start from the top. Like, what types of people volunteer? Why do people want to volunteer for organisations like the RSPB?
Oh, gosh. For a number of reasons, really. So it could be wanting to give back, but it could also be about learning, having the experience, gaining experience, community, wanting to connect with others to do things in their local communities and benefit their own local environments. Or it could be to learn specific skills and get to know what is part of conservation and how they can be involved and how they can give back. But it's important to note that there are so many different ways you can engage with conservation. It's not just field work. That's an amazingly important part of conservation volunteering, but it can be all aspects of an organisation carrying out conservation actions, which is something I'd quite like to talk a bit about.
Yeah, well, let's do that. Yeah. So, I mean, I think people do think of volunteering as getting out in the field. RSPB got lots of reserves, up and down the UK. You can imagine people turning up on site and helping to manage those reserves, whether it's helping to dig the ditches or put the fences up or monitor the bird population, whatever it might be. But yeah, just paint us a picture then, please, Rhoda. Like, what are the different roles that people can get involved with at the RSPB?
So at the moment, which I'm currently working in, is off reserve site, project site teams, and getting volunteers involved with species recovery actions.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be within that arena, it can be surveying, what you typically might think of as conservation volunteering, but it can also be nest protection, or it could be people engagement is a really large part of conservation, which sometimes people don't realise that that's something you can get involved with and work in with species recovery. There's policy, and there is so many areas. I'm struggling to kind of think of all of them, but it's anything to do with actually supporting a species and the recovery of a species, which is my particular role. But then obviously, as RSPB is also engaged in youth and education, marketing, fundraising. There are very many areas that you can get involved with as a volunteer to contribute towards conservation.
And I guess it sort of reflects just the breadth of work and activity that organisations like the RSPB do. You know, obviously you're not just scientists,
Yes.
you're not just site managers, you're fundraisers, you're communicators, you're project managers. You know, you are education specialists too, and engagement and events and everything else. And I guess all different aspects. Then that extra support that a volunteer can bring is going to help the organisation to function and to have more impact.
It does, yeah. It's incredibly important for us to have volunteers engaged with what we're doing as an organisation, because it helps us achieve more than we could on our own, and enable and brings in new skills. It brings in new ideas, and connects those communities together as well as, and getting them involved in our work.
Do you have a sense of how many volunteers or how many people support the charity, you know, in terms of spending their time and actually, you know, investing and helping as a volunteer with the RSPB? It's about
10,000 plus volunteers are engaged in the RSPB in work, conservation work, and different areas of conservation work.
Okay,
there's an awful lot right across the UK in all four countries.
And if people are listening and they wanted to get involved, where could they find out more about the different opportunities, or what advice would you give them in terms of kind of connecting with, or even creating opportunities with an employer like the RSPB?
So all of the current roles are advertised on our RSPB website, which will link you to our system Assemble, and that you can look for roles local to you, further away. But we have residential opportunities as well for volunteers who would like to volunteer over 6 months or a year to actually do some voluntary wardening, and that's something you can do through the RSPB. But yeah, I'd recommend people went to the website in the first instance and had a look at the roles that are currently available. But I also think there's if you're looking at moving career, for example, or you're just starting to find out, or you have certain skills to give, it's quite worth reaching out and contacting us via the website and letting us know what you'd like to get involved with.
Right, okay, so people can just get in touch, speculative if you like, you know, offer their services, and then you can try and connect them with the right people internally to see if an opportunity might be available or created for them. Yeah, that's right. And it does start with the role. That's the important thing, is finding the right role for the volunteer. Got you. Yeah. So I'm quite interested in what you just said there about sort of 6 and 12 month placements, because I've seen them. We've also advertised them on our website too. I know they're really popular. This is where people really sort of embed within like a site, a nature reserve, for 6 months, 12 months, and get like the full picture of what it's like to do that work and get hands-on experience. which will help them progress into a career in that area if that's something they're interested in.
Yes. Yeah, it does. And it covers different areas. So there's some reserves will be coastal based, and so will be much more around that. But there's also farming, some agricultural projects, and surveying areas as well. So there is quite a diverse array.
And how do you select people for these sorts of things? If people are interested in that, I'm sure they're popular, they look great. What are the sorts of criteria? What things should people bear in mind when they're applying for positions like that?
Well, in terms of applying for the role, they might want to consider what they want to get out of it. There are different types of roles and projects that they can apply for, and it's about finding the role that they feel is going to develop them in the area that they would like to progress, or just to get to know an area of the country and the species involved on those reserves. So the residential, it is such a large organisation, the residential scheme sort of sits alongside the normal local volunteering. So there's also opportunity for people to do much more local volunteering locally to them. And even more locally is the off-reserve opportunities of volunteer teams that are working to do species recovery.
Got you. So loads to go at. Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. I know the RSPB is not one of many organisations you can volunteer for, but to have 10,000 opportunities and people working at any one time is really kind of a real kind of goldmine, really, of experiences that people can kind of get involved with and have an impact on the ground as well. Yeah. And your role specifically, Rhoda, so you are a volunteer development consultant. You've worked at RSPB for, I read, 22 years on your
22 years, yeah.
on your profile. What's your job? What is a volunteering development consultant? Like, what's a typical day or week? And what
so I was a development consultant. I'm actually a project manager now, which I started in October last year. But volunteering development, we're really lucky at the RSPB. We've got a dedicated department division for volunteering and developing volunteering around the organisation. Volunteering development is about giving that support and development and management and resources for the on the frontline species projects and reserves to be able to recruit and develop their volunteering teams. It's a role that requires thinking about the future, making sure that we're growing with the changes that are occurring in both our culture and environmentally, and looking at how we can be diverse and available for lots of different types of volunteers to be involved with conservation work. And so would involve projects to discrete projects to help develop those different areas and create the support needed for those smaller project teams to access.
I see. So as a project manager right now, that's a big area of your work then, developing projects, managing those projects. Have you got maybe an example project you could talk about that sort of brings it to life a bit? Like what is the sort of a discrete piece of work within this area?
So the project I'm currently working on is the Species Volunteer Network. So that's specifically off-reserve project teams in England and Northern Ireland who are looking at the species recovery. So conservation science within the organisation will look through the reason why a species is particularly declining, and we'll come up with solutions and test solutions around how we recover that critical species. Once we have those solutions and they've started to test them and they know that it's causing a recovery of that species, we'll then move to engage volunteers so that they can create a legacy and be part of that species recovery and take that forwards by engaging teams with those species projects. We can then give them actions that will enable them to help us move the species along the species recovery curve, so that they come out of critical, which would be the ultimate aim.
Perfect. So things, I guess, species might be the things like, I'm thinking like hen harriers would be a sort of project people might work on. And
yeah, so it's very frustrating. There is so much to do. We've got a red list of 100 species, which we're currently working through. We can't do it. It can be quite frustrating because you can't do everything at the same time, even though we want to. So we've got to build from a sturdy foundation and be able to develop the projects. But we're currently working with 8 species across 18 projects around England and Northern Ireland. And we're currently working with, so in Northern Ireland, we're working with red kite. So even though red kite is doing really well in this country, we're still working with red kite in Northern Ireland, yellow hammer, and corn crake over in Northern Ireland. And then in England, we're working with little tern, stone curlew, beach nesting birds like little tern and plover. And yeah, we've got about 8 species we've picked up so far in the project. It will grow as big as we'll be able to grow it with size, development and funding, notwithstanding the challenges around building the projects and engaging as many diverse people as we can engage with the conservation programs.
And what, with your role specifically and the job that you do, what are the kind of the skill sets that someone like you needs to develop in themselves? Like, what are the important skills that you progress and you use daily, weekly, monthly, or if you're recruiting for someone into a role like you, like what are the sorts of things that you're looking for?
So it's an easy one would be passion for passionate people, engaging with people who really want to make a difference and engage. Volunteers are fantastic. They're engaged. They really want to give their time, and so it's about networking, skills in dealing with people, communicating with people, a lot of data management and keeping information safe on volunteers, and wanting to make a difference. I think it's quite often it's difficult, I think, because you can often, it's more about the passion and then the enthusiasm, and the skills will come in the experience of moving towards conservation by looking for those opportunities where you can take the current skills that you've got and move them forwards. There is no one set way to move into conservation. I feel that you can, it takes, an organisation takes lots of different roles, and so, as I said before, so you can move towards conservation with the skills that you've already got within areas that are like funding or marketing or project management, or because those roles exist within the organization, and that can be a real benefit to moving into conservation. There is tried and tested ways to get into conservation, but you don't necessarily have to be that way, and that certainly hasn't been the case for me. I've moved through IT, so I started in IT sales, and then moved into the data unit within conservation, and then moved from data unit into volunteering about 14 years ago, and have been combining the project management and conservation since then. So I think you can be quite flexible in how you move towards it, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah, and that's particularly useful, I think, for career switchers. You know, people already have a career outside of conservation looking to move in, and it can be quite bewildering to know where to go, and often there's a thought of having to start again from scratch. And actually, you know, conservation is such a kind of diverse, increasingly professional field, and we need, as you say, project managers, we need fundraisers, we need communicators or marketers, you know, all these sorts of skills that you find in almost any industry, you know, we need as well. And more we're seeing trends towards employing from outside in. You know, we want the best communicators. Actually, they're often found in the corporate sector, you know, so coming in and applying your skills, but with the new passion of whether it's birds or something else, you know, is a great way to kind of make that switch happen. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to hear it from your perspective too. Yeah. What are some of the key moments in your career, though, when you look back? You've mentioned you started in data and IT, and then you moved into other areas before kind of landing in volunteering. But when you look back at your career as a whole, you know, what have been the kind of key milestone moments, if you like, that kind of now on reflection were important to you?
Moving into conservation, knowing I wanted to make a difference, work with passionate people, and make a difference to the world, to other people, to my community, and that was quite a big decision for me. So I'd come out, I did a degree in psychology, I'd come out into IT. I did IT for a few years, for about 5 years, and just realized that it wasn't fulfilling me. It was fine, and I was getting my paycheck, but it wasn't fulfilling me. And moving towards conservation, and a passionate organization making a difference, I think that was a big key moment for me. And I've during the 14 years I've changed quite frequently, and I think it's about keeping your options open, looking for that opportunity to be able to give as well as earn, to be able to contribute my skills and what I've gone through. So recently, with the move into this role has been quite a key point for me, because I've felt when I got the opportunity to go for this role, I felt like it really represented not just my skills and my background and how I'd come through data and project management, managing projects and moving back towards conservation, but the future of what I would like to develop. So going back to conservation and being able to so I started in conservation, actually. I started in wise use of floodplains before going to the data unit. And this was the opportunity that presented itself to come back with the skills that I'd gained having left, and then come back with those skills and then be able to apply them directly to what really enthuses me and motivates me is a really exciting thing. It makes your role exciting if you can do that. So I don't think skills and experience are ever wasted. I think it's you can use that when you come back to a role.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
interesting like how few careers are very straight and direct, really squiggly careers where you're picking up skills and experiences as you go, sort of build on one another organically, and opportunities come along, you take them. And
yeah,
yeah, and it's interesting to hear also that you changed roles a number of times, like 14 times, across 14 years, within the RSPB.
yeah.
What's the RSPB like as an employer? See, the biggest conservation employer in Europe. Yeah, what's the organization like? What's the kind of culture like? What are the good bits? If you want to share any challenges or bad bits, you're welcome to do so. You don't have to, but like just paint a picture for people who don't know what it's like to work for an organization like the
Um, well, it's I've not had to steer it, but it must be a big ship to steer.
yeah.
But I think part of the positiveness is that they're always trying to develop and grow. And as things become important, they will include that. There's a lot of communication, lots of different levels of communication, which means you're always engaged. There is so much going on, it can be quite difficult to keep up on all of it. So they're very good at communicating. They have a specialized communications team that will make sure we've got spotlights and we find out what's going on, from teams who are dealing with global conservation to in-house development across the reserve. So it's really the communication, I think, is key across the organization, and the openness to continue to develop as an organization. The only constant is the change, and the fact that we're developing and moving into that, I think, has helped. Even recently, such as COVID and lockdown and being sent home, and I felt that the RSPB really reacted really very well, and we were all able to move online. And actually I wouldn't have this role if I couldn't do that, because I manage someone in Northern Ireland, Manchester, and my boss is in Edinburgh, so I wouldn't have that if I was in my old kind of office based. So it has really changed it, but the RSPB has just moved with that, and so it's quite a quick organization for the size that it is.
Yeah.
It's still that if there's any frustration, sometimes you feel like it's not moving fast enough, but it is. It's a brilliant organization to work for, which is why I'm still there after 22 years. Having the opportunity to move within the organization, that's a plus. That helps, because you're moving and always looking to, or I have been always looking to that next thing that I can grow into.
I guess that's a big contrast between a large organization like RSPB and a small conservation organization, which conservation has lots of, is that you have employment opportunities within a large organization to move to one side, to move up. In small organizations, people can often feel a bit stuck actually in a role, because there's just so many other roles within it to move through. And if you're being trained and developed too, there's obviously benefits of being with a larger
although the frustrating bit, I mean, to say about small organizations is that you're kind of a jack of all trades, aren't you? So you do get to do all of those things. It's just that your role maybe doesn't change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, as we start to sort of wrap the conversation up, we've got a few people listening as well, which we'll turn to them in a minute, and they can ask their own questions too. We like to sort of finish the kind of podcast with just some more open questions about you and perhaps how you think. And one thing that just struck me as you were talking about and this is typical across all conservationists, I think we all want to see more progress more quickly, and to move faster. And we do see, many species and habitats in threat across the world. Like, what do you think us as conservationists, as a movement, need to do more of, or be better at, to have more impact, to save more species, more sites? What are we lacking?
I think it's maybe the networking, the connections. We can all feel like we want to make a difference. Everybody can do stuff for themselves and take their own lead, but it's connecting those dots together and making sure that we create a movement to make those big changes. And so I think the connections and the noise of a larger amount, I think, is needed to continue, which I think in the last few years has felt like that's finally starting to happen. But more please, and let's keep continuing with that noise creation and community and networking.
So strength in numbers is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Clearer messaging. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And if we could transport you to any place on the earth to see any species, where would you go and what would you look at?
I don't know. I think I would want to go to... So I'm quite a homebod. I don't know that I'd necessarily want to go, although some of the places that you see when you watching Earth and programs like that is quite amazing. Actually, I'd probably want to go back to Scotland and see the capercaillie, which I think is an extraordinary species.
A great symbol of bird conservation too. I love it. Yeah. And final question. If we could make you like a global czar for the day, like a ruler of all humans, and you can enact one law or one decree or whatever we're going to call it that's going to make the world a better place and perhaps make the environment a better place, what sort of decree might you make?
Listen, I think. Listen to what's going on around you and hear the needs of people and species around you. I think we can get quite internal looking and forget that whilst we're worrying about ourselves, for sure, let's not forget those creatures and species that can't talk for themselves, that need to be heard.
Right. And on that positive note, I love that. Yeah. Thank you again for joining the podcast. And we're going to turn over to our audience in a minute to ask their questions. But Rhoda, thank you. It's been lovely talking to you. If people want to find out a bit more about you or perhaps find out more about RSPB volunteering, where should they go? Where should we send them?
They can contact us at volunteers@rspb.org.uk. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And we'll share that in the notes as well so people can find it there. Thanks again, Rhoda. It's been lovely to chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career-boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.